I first noticed something was off when Laura started working late more often. At first, I didn't think much of it. She'd always been driven, and always put her career front and center. I respected that about her. But lately, the nights stretched longer, and her excuses became more frequent. It was always the same line: "Charlie and I have to finish up this project." Charlie, her business partner. A guy the first had no reason to distrust, at least not until now. The first few times, I shrugged it off. Work is work, right? I knew how demanding her job could be. But after weeks of hearing the same excuse, the same name, Charlie, over and over, something began to gnaw at me. Her absences became more noticeable. She'd come home late, after I'd already eaten, sometimes after I'd already gone to bed. And when she did, she looked different. Not tired or stressed, like you'd expect after a long day at the office. No, she seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. It didn't make sense. It wasn't just the late nights, though. It was the way she started pulling away from me. We used to talk about everything, sharing the small details of our day. But now, our conversations felt like surface-level exchanges, like she was keeping something just out of reach. She'd tell me how busy her day had been, but there were no specifics, no stories, no laughter like before. When I'd ask her how things were going with Charlie, she'd give me short answers, avoiding eye contact. It was like she didn't want to talk about him, which only made me think about him more. I tried to push the thoughts aside. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous husband imagining things that weren't there. But the more I watched her, the more uneasy I felt. She was on her phone constantly, and every time I walked into the room, she'd lock it or turn it face down. It was small and subtle, but it stung. She used to leave her phone lying around, completely unconcerned. Now, it was always within arm's reach. Like she had something to hide. One night, she came home later than usual, saying she had a meeting with Charlie that ran over. There was something in the way she said it, a nervous edge to her voice, as if she was waiting for me to ask more. But I didn't. I just nodded and let it go, even though my mind was racing. When she went to take a shower, I caught myself staring at her phone on the counter. I could feel my chest tighten with temptation, just one look. But I stopped myself. I couldn't do it. I wasn't ready to confront whatever truth might be waiting for me there. Still, the doubts lingered. Every time I saw her smiling at a message on her phone or heard her talking softly to Charlie in the next room, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I started analyzing everything: her tone, her expressions, the way her body seemed to turn away from me, just slightly, when she was lost in thought. It was like she was drifting away from me, inch by inch, and I couldn't figure out why. I didn't want to believe that anything was happening between them. Laura wasn't like that. We had built a life together, a life I thought was solid. But the more I replayed everything in my mind, the late nights, the secretive texts, the way she talked about Charlie like he was the only thing that mattered, the harder it became to ignore the growing distance between us. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her. Whether it was to her work, to Charlie, or something else entirely, I didn't know. But I could feel it in my gut. It was a typical evening. Laura had come home late again, muttering something about a meeting with Charlie and how they were under pressure to close some deal. She seemed distracted, almost detached, but that wasn't new. I'd gotten used to it, her constant distance, the way she avoided real conversation, and how she always managed to be too tired to engage with me. I tried to convince myself, once again, that this was just work stress. And that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was off. After dinner, she headed upstairs to take a shower. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, just like she always did. Only this time, something caught my eye. Her phone screen lit up with a notification, a message from Charlie. I wasn't planning on doing anything. I didn't want to be that kind of husband. But something in me snapped, some deep instinct I couldn't ignore anymore. I had to know. I walked over to the counter and glanced at the screen. The preview of the message was enough to stop me in my tracks. It wasn't a work-related message, it was something more personal, more intimate. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it," the message read, followed by a winking emoji. My stomach lurched. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, my mind racing to process what I had just seen. My hands felt shaky, and my heart pounded in my chest as I unlocked her phone. I knew her passcode. She'd told me ages ago when we trusted each other completely. But now, as I swiped to unlock it, I felt like I was crossing some irreversible line. Once I was in, I scrolled up through their conversation, my heart sinking further with every word. It wasn't just one message or some isolated flirty remark. This had been going on for months. They had been meeting outside of work, spending time together in ways that had nothing to do with business. I read through the messages, my pulse quickening as the evidence piled up. The inside jokes, the confessions of how much they enjoyed each other's company. The mentions of drinks after work and private dinners, all of it painted a picture I couldn't deny. And then there it was, a message from Laura, sent just a few days ago. I can't wait to see you again. Ben won't suspect anything. I'll make sure of it. That was the one that hit me hardest. She knew. She knew I had started to question things, and instead of talking to me or facing whatever was happening between us, she chose to cover it up. To lie. To keep me in the dark while she carried on with Charlie behind my back. I felt sick. My whole body went numb as I stood there, staring at the phone in disbelief. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage, everything I had believed about her, about us, it was a lie. How long had I been blind? How long had I been fooling myself into thinking this was just a rough patch? I felt a burning anger rise inside me, an anger I hadn't felt in years. But beneath that anger was something even worse, betrayal. Pure, crushing betrayal. I set the phone down, my mind spiraling. How could she do this? After everything we'd been through, after the life we had built together. And Charlie. The guy the first had trusted, the guy the first never saw as a threat. He was supposed to be her business partner, not her secret lover. How could I have been so blind? As I stood there, a storm of emotions swirling inside me, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this continue. I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had a plan. I needed to be smart about this. If she had been lying to me for this long, then who knows what else she was capable of. I had to gather more information, figure out how deep this affair went, and what exactly they were hiding. My mind shifted from hurt to determination. I wasn't going to let her make a fool of me anymore. If she thought I wouldn't suspect anything, she was wrong. This was war now, and I wasn't going to be the one who lost. That night, I stayed up, thinking of my next move. I would start with Charlie. I needed to know everything about him, his life outside of work. His weaknesses, his secrets. If I was going to bring them down, I had to be prepared. I couldn't let my emotions get in the way. This wasn't just about Laura anymore. It was about taking control, about getting back what was mine. If she thought she could keep me in the dark, she had no idea what was coming. After that night, when I found the messages on Laura's phone, something inside me changed. It wasn't enough to just confront her and end things. That would be too easy. She had lied, betrayed me, and carried on with Charlie like I was some kind of fool. And Charlie, he wasn't innocent in any of this. He had to know I existed, and I trusted him as Laura's business partner. Yet he went behind my back like I was nothing. I wasn't just going to expose their affair. I wanted to destroy them, both of them, for what they had done. Revenge became my new focus. It gave me clarity and a sense of purpose. Every time I looked at Laura, pretending like everything was normal, I felt the anger build. But I didn't show it. I kept my face neutral and even managed to smile when she asked me how my day was. I had to be patient, I had to play this smart. I couldn't let her see the storm brewing inside me. My first step was figuring out everything I could about Charlie. I wasn't going to confront him directly, not yet, at least. No, I needed to know his weaknesses, his secrets, the things that could ruin him if they came to light. I started small, casually mentioning him to mutual acquaintances, getting a feel for how he was perceived. A few people spoke highly of him and said he was a sharp businessman, a real go-getter. But others weren't so kind. I heard whispers about shady deals and rumors that his business practices weren't always above board. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I knew there was more to uncover, and I was determined to find it. I turned to social media next, combing through Charlie's profiles like a detective searching for clues. On the surface, his life seemed perfect, polished pictures of vacations, dinners at high-end restaurants, and the occasional post about his business successes. But it wasn't the photos themselves that interested me. It was the small details, the people tagged in the background, the places he frequented, the connections he had. Every post was a breadcrumb, leading me deeper into his life. I created a fake profile, something that wouldn't raise any red flags, and started following him. It was easy enough to blend in, to make it look like I was just another admirer of his carefully curated life. Through this, I started mapping out his routine. He went to the same gym every morning, grabbed coffee from the same cafe on his way to work, and had lunch with the same group of colleagues at least twice a week. He was predictable, and that made him vulnerable. But it wasn't just his public life I was interested in. I needed more. I began reaching out to people who might know him better, friends of friends, using casual conversation to dig deeper. I started learning about his personal life, his family, his relationships, even his financial struggles. It turns out that for all the success he flaunted online, Charlie was in deeper debt than anyone realized. He had borrowed money to keep his business afloat during rough times, and he was barely keeping his head above water. That piece of information lit a fire inside me. Now I had something real to work with. I wasn't just satisfied with knowing where he had his lunch or how much debt he was in. I wanted to know who he was behind the facade. I started keeping a closer watch on him. It was easier than I thought. I would sit in my car outside his office or the cafe he frequented, blending into the background, watching him from a distance. I studied his movements, the people he met, and the way he carried himself when he thought no one was watching. It felt empowering to know more about him than he realized. The hunter, tracking his prey. The more I watched, the more patterns emerged. Charlie wasn't as careful as he thought. He had a routine, and routines are dangerous when someone's paying attention. He often stayed late at work, sometimes alone, sometimes with Laura. And while most of his interactions seemed innocent enough, I knew better now. I knew what they were doing behind closed doors. I could see the subtle glances they exchanged when they thought no one was looking, and the way they laughed a little too easily when they were together. But I didn't just want to catch him in the act. I wanted to destroy everything he had built. His business, his reputation, his personal life, it all had to crumble. I kept digging, using every resource I had. Old colleagues, acquaintances from years ago, even people who had only crossed paths with him once or twice. I reached out to anyone who might have dirt on him, and bit by bit, the picture of Charlie as the perfect businessman started to crack. I learned that he had been involved in a failed investment a few years back, one that nearly bankrupted him. He had managed to recover, but not without stepping on a few toes along the way. Some people still held grudges, people who had been burned by his ambition. I took note of every name and every detail, knowing that eventually, I could use this information to my advantage. At night, I would lie in bed next to Laura, feeling the cold distance between us, and plot my next move. She had no idea what I was doing, no idea that I was slowly pulling the strings, setting everything in motion. The more I uncovered, the more powerful I felt. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about control. I was going to take back control of my life, my marriage, and everything they had taken from me. Charlie thought he could outsmart me, and he thought he could have my wife and keep his perfect life intact. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. I was going to make sure that by the time I was done, he would lose everything. After weeks of watching and digging, I finally found what I needed. Charlie had serious tax issues and was illegally running parts of his business. It wasn't just minor errors, he was committing fraud. He had been hiding income, using fake companies to avoid taxes, and cooking the books. If this information got out, it would destroy him financially and legally. His entire empire was built on lies, and I had the proof to bring it all crashing down. With the evidence in hand, I started to plan. I wanted more than just revenge for the affair. I wanted to ruin him completely. I organized everything I had: emails, financial documents, and fraudulent transactions. My goal was to make Charlie squirm before exposing him. I decided to send him anonymous threats, revealing only small pieces of the incriminating evidence. This would make him panic, knowing someone had found out, but not knowing who or how much they knew. I also wanted Laura to see the real Charlie, a criminal, not the man she thought she loved. I sent my first anonymous email, hinting that I knew about his tax evasion and fraud. "This is just the beginning," I wrote, making sure he'd feel the fear of being watched. Charlie's reaction was immediate. He became more anxious, constantly checking his phone, clearly shaken. A week later, I sent another message with more details, letting him know that his secrets were being compiled for exposure. He was spiraling, but he had no idea it was me pulling the strings. A few days after my second message to Charlie, I thought I had him on the ropes. He was jittery, clearly rattled by the anonymous emails I had sent. I was sure he was scrambling to cover his tracks, trying to figure out who was behind the threats. But then, everything took an unexpected turn. It was a Friday evening when I got the call. I was in my office, going over some paperwork, still riding the high of knowing I had Charlie cornered. When my phone buzzed, I didn't recognize the number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something told me to pick up. "Hello, Ben," a familiar voice said on the other end. My heart skipped a beat. It was Charlie. For a moment, I was speechless. Why was he calling me? How did he even get my number? The sound of his voice, calm and steady, caught me completely off guard. I had been expecting him to be panicked, maybe even on the verge of a breakdown. But there was no fear in his tone. Instead, there was something else, confidence. "I know what you've been doing," Charlie continued, his voice low and controlled. "You thought you could scare me, didn't you? Send me a few anonymous threats and watch me squirm. But here's the thing, Ben, I've been watching you too." My blood ran cold. The smugness in his voice made my stomach churn. I had no idea what he was talking about, but something about the way he said it made me realize I had underestimated him. I had assumed I was in control, that he had no clue who was pulling the strings. But now, it was clear that Charlie wasn't just a target. He had been playing his own game. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my pulse quickening. "Oh, come on," he said, with a hint of amusement. "You think you're the only one who knows how to dig up dirt? While you were busy following me, and sending your little messages, I had my own eyes on you. And, guess what? I found a few things you wouldn't want anyone to know about." My mind raced. What could he possibly know? I hadn't done anything illegal, at least nothing like what he had been doing. But then, Charlie dropped the bomb. "I know about the shady deal with that contractor last year. The one you paid under the table to get those permits for your expansion. Funny how you forgot to mention that on your tax returns, isn't it?" His voice was laced with satisfaction. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The deal he was talking about was something I'd long since pushed to the back of my mind. It had been a small, one-off decision, something I didn't think would ever come back to haunt me. But hearing it now, in Charlie's mouth, it felt like a noose tightening around my neck. "And that's just the beginning," he continued, not missing a beat. "I've got emails, invoices, and a nice little paper trail that could ruin you. One phone call and your business goes under. And let's not forget about your reputation. How do you think people would react if they knew you'd been bending the law to get ahead?" I was speechless. My entire plan had backfired spectacularly. I had thought I was in control, that I was the one with the power to destroy him. But now, Charlie had turned the tables on me. He knew everything, and worse, he had the proof. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew how weak they sounded. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," Charlie replied, his tone sharp. "You see, Ben, you came after me, and now it's my turn. I could take everything from you, your business, your reputation, even your family. But here's the thing, I don't want to destroy you. Not yet." I gripped the phone tightly, trying to keep my breathing steady. I could feel the walls closing in around me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Charlie laughed softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. "For now, I just want you to back off. Stop whatever game you think you're playing, or I'll pull the trigger. Trust me, Ben, you don't want me as an enemy. You have no idea what I'm capable of." I sat there, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. Charlie had won this round. I had tried to ruin him, and now he had the power to destroy me. Everything I had built, my business, my reputation, could be gone in an instant if he decided to release the information he had on me. "Consider this your only warning," Charlie said, his voice deadly serious now. "You keep coming after me, and I'll bury you. You won't even see it coming." The call ended with a cold click, leaving me sitting in stunned silence. For the first time in weeks, I realized I was the one being hunted. I had thought I could take Charlie down, but now I was the one teetering on the edge of ruin. Charlie didn't waste time after that first call. The very next day, I received an email from him. It was short and to the point, with a tone that only made my stomach churn more. He was offering a deal. "Ben, you stop whatever it is you're doing, and I'll keep quiet. Walk away, and no one needs to know about your little indiscretions. It's that simple. You don't want to lose everything, do you, Charlie?" I read the message over and over again, my anger rising with every word. He wasn't threatening me anymore, he was blackmailing me. He wanted me to back off, to crawl away and let him walk free after everything he had done. He was dangling the destruction of my business and reputation over my head, knowing full well that one word from him could send everything I'd built crashing down. But he wasn't just offering me a way out. He was offering to win. I stared at the email for what felt like hours, my hands shaking with the weight of the decision. On one hand, I could accept his offer. I could step back, forget about revenge, and protect myself from the disaster that was hanging over me. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice. But the thought of letting him get away with it, of walking away like a coward, was unbearable. My pride was screaming at me. He had stolen my wife, humiliated me, and now he was threatening to destroy everything I had left. I couldn't let him win. I wouldn't. The desire for revenge was too strong, burning inside me like a fire I couldn't extinguish. I knew the risks. I knew I was standing on the edge of a cliff, but something inside me refused to back down. My hatred for Charlie and my need to prove I wasn't weak outweighed the fear of losing everything. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I made a decision. I was going to fight back, consequences be damned. If Charlie wanted to go to war, I would meet him head on. I knew the risks. I could lose my business, my reputation, maybe even my marriage. But I couldn't let him win. I couldn't live with myself if I let him walk away unscathed. So, I started planning my next move, determined to push back even harder, to dig up more dirt, to outplay him. The more I threw myself into my plan, the more tangled everything became. Every step I took seemed to make things worse, but I was in too deep to stop. I spent hours poring over Charlie's business dealings, trying to find more incriminating evidence. Something bigger, something that would be the final nail in his coffin. I even began considering going public with what I had, but every time I got close to that decision, the weight of Charlie's blackmail pulled me back. If he exposed what he knew about me, it would be over. And then there was Laura. She was starting to notice. At first, she just seemed distant, like she was preoccupied with work or distracted by her thoughts. But slowly, her suspicion started to grow. I could see it in the way she looked at me. The way her questions became more pointed. "What's going on with you, Ben?" she asked one night as we sat in the living room, the TV buzzing in the background. "You've been so off lately. Is something wrong at work? Or is it something else?" I could feel the tension rising between us. She didn't know the full extent of what I was up to, but she was smart enough to know that something wasn't right. And it wasn't just her questions, the guilt was starting to eat away at me. I was living a double life, consumed by my obsession with taking down Charlie while pretending everything was fine at home. I tried to brush her off, muttering excuses about work stress and deadlines, but she wasn't buying it. She kept pushing, and with each conversation, the distance between us grew. I could feel her slipping away, and in a twisted way, it only fueled my desire for revenge even more. Charlie had already taken her from me emotionally, now I had nothing left to lose. But the more I dug into Charlie's life, the messier it all became. I was losing track of the lies I was telling, the steps I was taking, and the game I was playing. I was chasing leads that went nowhere, following rumors that fizzled out, and all the while, Charlie was watching, waiting. I could feel his presence like a shadow looming over everything I did, reminding me that he could pull the trigger at any moment and end it all. The stress was suffocating. I barely slept, my mind constantly racing with thoughts of what Charlie might do next. Or how I could stay one step ahead. My obsession with revenge was consuming me, blinding me to everything else. Even Laura, who had once been my everything, was now just a part of the collateral damage in my twisted pursuit of vengeance. And yet, I couldn't stop. I had come too far. The tension between Laura and me reached a boiling point one evening after I had spent another long day buried in research and surveillance. I had just returned home, my mind still racing with thoughts of Charlie and my next move. I was exhausted, but when I walked into the living room, I could see Laura was waiting for me, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "Ben, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but strained. I knew what was coming. She had been patient with my erratic behavior for weeks, but now, the facade was crumbling. I braced myself for the confrontation, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's going on with you?" she pressed, her eyes locking onto mine. "You've been so distant lately. You don't talk to me like you used to, and it feels like you're hiding something." I took a deep breath, trying to play it cool. "It's just work stress, Laura. I have a lot on my plate right now, I replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. She shook her head, clearly unconvinced. This isn't just about work. I know you, Ben. Something's bothering you, and I can't help you if you won't talk to me. Her words stung. I wanted to tell her everything, about Charlie, the blackmail, the revenge I was seeking, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I deflected, desperate to keep my secrets hidden. I just need some time to figure things out. I'll be fine. But Laura wasn't buying it anymore. No, you won't. You're not fine. You're obsessed with something, and it's affecting us. I can feel it. Why can't you just open up to me? The desperation in her voice pierced through my defenses. I felt the walls I had built around myself beginning to crack. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. My pride clashed with my love for her, and I was torn between wanting to share my burdens and fearing the consequences of my choices. Is it Charlie? She asked, her tone shifting from frustration to concern. I saw you two together the other day. What's going on between you? You've never been this secretive before. That name, Charlie, made my blood boil. It was like a trigger, igniting all the anger and resentment I had buried deep inside. Why does it matter? I snapped, my voice rising. It's none of your business. The words hung in the air, and I immediately regretted them. I could see the hurt flash across her face, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But my pride held me hostage. I wasn't going to back down. Maybe you should focus on your problems instead of digging into mine. I continued, anger flooding my voice. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. Maybe if you weren't so wrapped up in your world, you'd understand. Laura's eyes widened in disbelief. I'm trying to help you, Ben. Do you think I'm being selfish? I'm here, and I want to support you, but you're pushing me away. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. The words cut deeper than I expected, and suddenly, I was faced with the truth I had been avoiding. I was pushing her away. I was so consumed by my vendetta against Charlie that I had neglected the one person who truly cared about me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I don't need your help, I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. I can handle this on my own. But even as I said it, I felt the fragility of my own words. I was lying, to her and myself. The truth was, I didn't want to face this battle alone, but I couldn't admit that. I couldn't let her see my weakness. Fine, Laura replied, her voice cold and hurt. If you want to fight this battle alone, go ahead. But don't expect me to sit here and watch you destroy yourself. I can't do this anymore, Ben. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the living room, the silence deafening. The weight of her words sank in, and I realized I had pushed her to her limit. I was losing her, and all because I was obsessed with revenge. The conflict had erupted, exposing the cracks in our relationship, and I was left alone to face the consequences of my choices. At that moment, I understood just how much I had sacrificed in my quest for vengeance. It wasn't just Charlie I was fighting against, I was fighting against everything I had built with Laura. And now, it was all slipping through my fingers. The days that followed our confrontation were a blur of chaos and despair. I had become a ghost in my own life, wandering through each day with a hollow feeling in my chest. Laura was distant, her eyes filled with disappointment and hurt, and I could feel the chasm between us widening with every passing moment. She had made it clear she couldn't stand by and watch me self-destruct, but I was too entrenched in my vendetta to truly grasp what was happening. My business, which had once felt solid and promising, began to crumble under the weight of my neglect. Clients sensed the shift, my focus was fractured, and my energy drained. Meetings I once led with confidence were now filled with awkward pauses and half-hearted assurances. I could see the concern in my partner's eyes, the way they whispered behind closed doors, wondering if I was fit to lead anymore. I was losing them, just like I was losing Laura. One particularly bleak evening, I received a call from my accountant. Ben, we need to talk about the financials, she said, her voice tight with concern. As she laid out the details, I felt my heart race. The problems were piling up, unpaid taxes, mounting debts, and a drop in revenue that I couldn't explain. My reckless pursuit of revenge had blinded me to the reality of my situation. I'm handling it, I lied, desperation creeping into my voice. Ben, this isn't something you can handle alone, she replied, concern edging her tone. If you don't take immediate action, you could lose everything. Her words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I sat in my dimly lit office, staring at the papers scattered across my desk, feeling the walls close in. I had let my obsession consume me, and now, everything I had built was hanging by a thread. I picked up my phone, wanting to reach out to Laura, to apologize and beg for her forgiveness, but I hesitated. What could I say? How could I explain the monster I had become? Then came the final blow. A week later, I found a letter in the mail, a notice from my lawyer. Charlie had filed a lawsuit against me, claiming defamation and harassment due to my anonymous threats. I sat frozen as I read the words, the reality crashing over me like a tidal wave. He was not just retaliating, he was dismantling me piece by piece. He had the means to drag my name through the mud, to expose my secrets in court, and I had no way to stop him. That night, I confronted Laura again. We need to talk, I said, my voice shaking as I walked into the living room. She looked up from her book, her expression wary. I can't keep pretending everything is fine, she replied, her tone flat. No, you don't understand, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. Charlie is coming after me. I need your help. Laura's expression softened for a moment, but the hurt was still there. What do you want me to do, Ben? You've pushed me away for so long. I can't just jump back in after everything that's happened. I made mistakes. I know that now. But I need you. I pleaded, my voice breaking. I've lost everything. My business, my reputation, and soon, I'll lose you too. Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment, I thought I could see the glimmer of the love we once shared. But then she shook her head, the resolve hardening in her expression. You did this to yourself. You wanted revenge so badly that you couldn't see what you were destroying. I can't be part of this anymore, Ben. And just like that, she was gone. I watched her walk away, the weight of her words crushing me under their enormity. At that moment, I realized the truth, I had lost everything that mattered. Laura was leaving, my business was on the brink of collapse, and my revenge plot had only led to my downfall. Charlie hadn't won, I had lost to my demons. As I sat alone in the dark, I finally understood the bitter irony of it all. The real enemy hadn't been Charlie, it was the anger and pride that had driven me to this point. My need for revenge had blinded me to the love and support I had in my life. I had sacrificed everything for a battle that only led to my destruction. In that moment of clarity, I felt the full weight of my choices. I had become a prisoner of my own making, trapped in a cycle of anger and resentment that had cost me everything. I had fought so hard against Charlie that I had forgotten what truly mattered, the love of the woman I had taken for granted, the respect of my colleagues, and the life I had built. As the tears fell freely down my cheeks, I knew I had to confront the mess I had made. It was time to face the consequences of my actions, to rebuild what I could, even if it meant starting from nothing. But as I sat in the silence, the realization washed over me like a cold shower. I had lost more than just my business or my marriage, I had lost myself. As the days turned into weeks, the initial shock of my losses began to fade, giving way to a fragile sense of clarity. I realized that wallowing in self-pity wouldn't change anything, it would only prolong my suffering. With a heavy heart but a newfound determination, I began to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I sought out professional help to address the overwhelming feelings of anger and guilt that had clouded my judgment for so long. Therapy became a safe space for me to confront my demons, to explore the roots of my obsession with revenge and the deep-seated insecurities that had driven me to destroy everything I held dear. Gradually, I found the strength to reach out to my business partners. I was honest about my mistakes and the state of our company, accepting responsibility for the turmoil I had caused. To my surprise, instead of anger, I was met with understanding and a willingness to work together to rebuild. We formulated a recovery plan, focusing on restoring client relationships and revitalizing our operations. The support of my team ignited a spark of hope within me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself, working towards a common goal rather than spiraling down a path of self-destruction. In my personal life, I took small steps to mend the rift with Laura. I respected her space but sent her thoughtful messages, reminding her of the good times we had shared and how much I appreciated her support. I was honest about my journey, sharing what I was learning about myself and the changes I was making. To my relief, she began to respond. Our conversations started to shift from cold, distant exchanges to meaningful discussions. We slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. And I held on to the hope that, in time, we could find our way back to each other. With each passing day, I felt the weight of my past actions lifting ever so slightly. I learned to focus on the present and set realistic goals for the future. I started engaging in activities that brought me joy, like painting and hiking, rediscovering passions I had neglected in my quest for vengeance. As I embraced a healthier lifestyle, I felt more grounded and at peace. I realized that life was not about the battles I fought against others, but rather the journey of self-discovery and growth. Although I still carried the scars of my mistakes, I understood that I had the power to create a better future, one built on understanding, compassion, and resilience. As the weeks went by, I noticed a shift in my interactions with Laura. Slowly but surely, she began to let her guard down, responding to my messages with a warmth that had been absent for so long. We started meeting for coffee, our conversations shifting from the awkward tension of our last argument to more open and honest discussions about our lives. I listened intently as she shared her feelings about the past months, and I could see that she was still hurt, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Each meeting felt like a tentative step toward healing, a fragile bridge we were rebuilding together. One evening, as we sat in a cozy cafe, I took a deep breath and finally expressed how truly sorry I was for everything. I admitted my mistakes, my insecurities, and how I had taken her for granted. To my surprise, Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. A gesture that spoke volumes. "I see that you're trying, Ben," she said softly. "And I appreciate it. It's going to take time, but I want to believe we can work through this." At that moment, I felt a rush of gratitude and relief. It was a small step, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter for us. One filled with the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a stronger foundation of trust and understanding.